Hey, welcome everybody. David Pelren and I, we go back a long ways to a lot of projects working with Tennessee Scenic River Association, building river access sites across the state. And I do have to throw this in there. When I managed the Harpeth River State Park, all the access sites that were built by volunteers with the Tennessee Scenic River Association and other volunteers survived the 2010 flood. The one access we had built by a contractor, the only thing left was the concrete and the rebar. That was it. Anything that was wood was gone. So anyway, David Pelren, he is a fish and wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. He's worked in the Ecological Services Field Office in Cookeville since 1992. He's received his master's in biology from Tennessee Tech. He studied the effects of logging on water quality, fish, and invertebrates. David's able to share much of his time between aquatic and cave conservation. He appreciates opportunities for both protection and improvement of Tennessee's amazing outdoor resources. While he's not working, he's typically spending time. Spending time with his daughter, and he's hiking, fishing, hunting, gardening, canoeing, doing all those kinds of things. And so, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Geoff Luckett, and then we'll get right back into the presentation, starting with David. Geoff, wow. Geoff truly loves the outdoors. At a very young age in East Tennessee, he has loved all things from paddling to fishing to hiking to camping. He's an active kayak angler for over 20 years. So those of you that like to get out there on the waterways and fish in the kayak, he's your man. He started kayaking. He started the Tennessee Kayak Anglers program 10 years ago. He has a web page and there's a message board. So if you guys want to find out when the tournaments and other things like that are going on, probably a good site to go to. And that is the Tennessee Kayak Anglers.com. He is also a certified ACA level 2 kayak instructor. He has he's very active in the fishing community. He loves to introduce people to the waterways, talk about what happens, all that good stuff. And as a matter of fact, he is probably one of the few ACA certified instructors east of the Mississippi River. So if you got some questions for Geoff, he's the man to talk to. All right, with that being said, David, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right. Well, Jane, thanks very much. It's an honor to be part of the conversation tonight. And Ryan, looks like y'all are having a great time with river conservation. Shoot, y'all just keep plugging along. That's great. Well, yeah, I'm a biologist with Fish and Wildlife Service, and I do enjoy rivers very much so. I get to split my time between those and bats, it seems like. But I'm gonna see if I can get this. There we go. Oh, and I am not sharing my screen yet, am I?
Not yet.
Ooh, I will find, oh, here we go. I think I can get this. Oh, I'm slow here, excuse me. We will get it. Share. And then
there you go.
Let's bring up the presentation. Here we go.
Yay.
Let's go from the beginning. Da-da-da. So yes, hey, we all like to fish, don't we?
Love it.
Jane gave me the rough part. Geoff's going to tell us all kinds of good fishing stories. I'm gonna be his warm up. We'll bounce around, talk about fish habitat tonight. If y'all have questions anytime, feel free to jump in. Just say, "Hey, question," and we'll get that going. But I'll watch some faces over here. I can see Angela and Geoff and Jane. So wave at me if I'm not hearing you. But I'll talk about rivers a lot. If folks have questions about ponds, lakes, things like that, great too. Jump right in there on those. So, well, to thrive, animals need, y'all have probably all heard it, water, food, shelter, and they need to reproduce. Whether we're talking about insects, invertebrates, mussels, fish. Well, we've got fragile paper shells here. You can see we've got a juvenile on the bottom, adult on the top there, but we've got good quality water. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? Whether you're talking about trout, smallmouth bass, or whatever. I like them both myself. Cold water, warm water. Food, we're talking about algae, plankton, detritus that mussels like to eat, and different fish. And whether we're talking about the game fish or those forage fish that they eat, or just it's all linked, isn't it? So think about all of those as we kind of think about habitat. And I'm kind of getting to the basics here to kind of get us in the mindset of thinking toward catching that big fish, and lots of them, you know, but along with that algae, plankton, detritus, yeah, and other fish and other critters. So keep that in mind as we talk about habitat. They need shelter. We're talking about objects to hide behind and under, and shade can act as shelter in itself. And for mussels, we're talking about stable substrate material, something that's not moving around a lot on us. Animals need to reproduce. I've been talking about individuals here with the water, food, and shelter, and then thinking about species as a whole, fish communities as a whole. They need to move forward and keep going in the future. Let's move on here. We're talking about water quality here with good fish habitat. You need good, clean water. And that means low levels of toxicants. Temperature is important, obviously. Yeah, again, whether you're talking trout or warm water fisheries. The substrate and structure is going to be a critical part here with our fish. With that structure, you know, you're talking about boulders, logs. Water willow is something good to look at in a lot of our streams in Middle Tennessee. And another thing with that fish habitat, look at the structure up and down the river. You've got the riffle and pool habitat, and then when you're talking about ponds, you've got your littoral areas, those shallow areas where they serve as nurseries for those younger fish, and those limnetic or deeper areas where the bigger fish will hang out, little fish sneaking out in there too. But yeah, we've got with those riffles and pools, our darters are in those type areas. The pools, you know, you've got your rock bass, your bluegill are going to hang out in those kinds of areas. Think about those. And think about longitudinally up and down a river. Creek chubs are going to be way up in the head end. You get into a black-side dace is a species that I deal with a lot. It's a federally threatened species. And that's getting down into those lower gradient areas that don't drop down in the waterfalls as much, you know. And then you get down into even flatter areas farther downstream that gets into the southern red belly dace kind of situation. And so those are just some species that are kind of representative of some of those things going on. But,
Dave, we have a quick question from Scott.
Question.
He'd like to know what's causing all the gross mossy stuff in the lakes this season.
Oh, you know, that's a great question. I know one of the things that my wife and daughter noticed about a month ago when the water supply, or when the rain was lower, and I think you're talking about things you see, but I'll talk about this one first. When the flow into Center Hill Reservoir got lower, and I live in Cookeville, that's our water supply. When that got lower, the blue-green algae kicked in, and you had a musty kind of a flavor in your water. So that's a lousy one. But when you see this brown algae in the streams, a lot of times that's a product of too many nutrients in the water, a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and so there could be multiple sources of that. But one thing that we'll focus on with this structure and vegetation is shade. When you're in your smaller streams, you're not going to have as much opportunity for that algae to grow well with that shade. You have diatoms, it's a type of algae, and that produces energy for the food chain. But nutrients are one of the main things that you see there in that situation. Other questions as we go along here? Well, here in this photo, I've got to brag a little bit. I got to get out week before last. With COVID, I've been in my office, at home office for, well, since March. I did get to get out and do a bat, Anabat acoustic road route for 3 hours, 2 different times, but I got out on Duck River week before last, and this is at Columbia. I got to Lillard's Mill too, but there's a team from Alabama that came up and they were doing IFIM type work, and I'm not sure if folks even call it that these days, but the in-stream flow incremental methodology. We've got about a 200-foot long section of stream that they're looking at looking from downstream to upstream, and they divide it into transects, and they'll go along about one or 2 feet along each of these tapes, and they'll look at the velocity and the depth and the substrate at each of these points. If you think about it, fish, depending on the species, are going to key in on different depths, velocities, and substrates, and the vegetation is going to play into that, the structure. Yeah, when I got out with TVA several years ago, I was amazed at those ichthyologists' abilities to say, see the faster water out there in the middle? That's where you're going to find such and such. Over here on the side, here's such and such. Dave Ettenauer was an amazing guy with that too. He's the guy who found the snail darter, UT Knoxville professor. But we got over on East Fork Stones River, downstream of Woodbury. I grew up around Murfreesboro there. That's the section we were on with Ettenauer was between Woodbury and Murfreesboro, but Ettenauer was saying we should find a small scale darter in here. This is looking perfect, and you start looking at where that log is, and those small scale darters, they like to sit in those eddies and jump out in that current, grab some food, and get right back in. So yeah, it was really neat to see that working. But let me move on to our next one here. Substrate and structure are really important to fish. Geoff will probably focus on this a little bit, so I won't steal all his thunder, but you're looking at things, looking at, let's see, the types are ranging in size from smaller to bigger. You've got clay, silt, sand, gravels, and then your cobble is about baseball size, boulders getting up about basketball size, and then bedrock. And most of your game fish are going to be looking for that cover. So yeah, keep that in mind as you're going fishing. And it's something that we want to look at as we do different developmental projects. If you're out there grabbing a lot of gravel from the stream, to put on your driveways or whatever, it's something that can affect the stream. You take that gravel from one spot and it's going to flow from another place to there. And so if you're doing a lot of that along the stream, then you're affecting that kind of thing. So let's see, let's go on to our photo of the dam. I don't know if Dory's with us yet, but I'm preaching to the choir here on dams. And no, she's not here, but we got a lot of choir here tonight that I'm preaching to, I know. Dams can be good for some things, but not so good for some native species. They can hold back a lot of sediment. They're rough on mussels, especially those bigger dams. They can affect temperatures. That Cumberland River over in the Carthage area, the mussels are taking it rough there. Oxygen levels and fish movements, obviously, and that can affect the mussels. Those mussels, they ride on fish as glaucidia, those baby mussels, and that's how they move upstream. So dams are an effect there. And you can see that I'm moving from the habitat into things that we as people can do to influence rivers. Think about other things, construction, roads, wastewater, water withdrawals, row crops, just we could go on and on. But think about these kind of things as you look at habitat effects. We'll go on to our, this is Zeb Mountain surface mine. This was taken about 10 years ago, but there's a little Seritia lespedeza here. And I know Jane mentioned, hey, you know, we're focused on invasive exotics a lot. You know, rivers, the Seritia might be not as much of a problem as some of these other things. Privet, I'm seeing more and more along streams in Middle Tennessee. Japanese knotweed is one. There's Dory. Howdy, man. But Japanese knotweed, I saw a recent scientific paper saying that where that grows in big clumps, you can have some pretty rough bank sloughing. But other species, getting on the Obed Wilderness Scenic Rivers website, they're focusing on autumn olive, multiflora rose, mimosa. Hydrilla has been a big problem in Daddy's Creek, and we think that's come down from the Fairfield Glade area, the ponds up there. It's gotten down into the Obed River, and so it's really affecting fish and habitat there. Let's go on here to think about stream crossings a little bit. We put a lot of things in the rivers and streams, and we take a lot of things out, and we change them a lot. Sometimes we just drive through them, and that can affect the sediment load. Here where there's a bridge, and you love to see bridges cross rivers, so you minimize the effects, but there's a little bank sloughing here, so wherever you can do some good vegetation on those sloughing type situations, that's a great one. Culverts are another point. That's something we put in streams, and along with dams, they can affect fish passage. So we're going in and replacing culverts a lot of times. So the bottoms of them sit down flush with the bottom of the stream. And that way fish can move up into these smaller streams during spring spawning runs. Let's go on here. Keep that mud out of the creek. That's, I think West Virginia had a best management practices manual, and that was their title. Sediment is one of our bigger problems, and if you can lick the sediment problem, you've got it just about halfway figured out, I think, sometimes. But I was over driving over toward Granville the other day and saw a group that had done a low water crossing, and yeah, there's a little more mud in the creek than it looked like there should be. I gave TDEC a call.
Not a call for a little bit.
I'll send photos, and TDEC is really good about checking out these situations. If you can tell them what time you saw a particular situation, send a photo, they can really work with you in being sure that these best management practices are put on the ground out there. Let's see. Yeah, and so it comes to partnerships. I was with the Adopt a River program with Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association, and I know y'all are doing a whole lot of that monitoring kind of thing yourselves. And to get those eyes of the citizens out there who are already out there enjoying it, it takes a lot of looking to keep that things in good shape. Let's see, let's move on here. This is the Tellico River. Gosh, yeah, if you've got clean waters, riffles, pools, cover, can it get any better? Well, you got some great fish opportunity here. You might not catch a big old muskie here, but good situation for some trout.
David, got another question for you.
Yeah, let's hear it.
This is from Andrew, and he'd like to know what's going on with all the old tires in the Harpeth. What's the negative effect on the health of the river? Or are there any positives with having those tires in the river?
Ooh, great question. I'll have to admit, I being in Cookeville, I have not looked around the Harpeth lately. It's a shame. We've got a few of them around here too. And I'm afraid you're going to see them for quite a while, but if we can pull those out of there, that's great. And, you know, just debris in general is a great way. Pulling it out of the streams is a great way to at least improve the aesthetics of the stream. There may be some substances leached from those tires that that are going to provide a negative effect. Not as much as batteries and you know, some obvious pollutants like that, but well, they might provide structure in some situations. I'd rather have the natural structure there, boulders and such. So in a net sense, I tend to think pulling them out of there is a great idea. Has anybody else got a thought about that?
Well, I will
If I see a
suggest.
tire in the river, I'm going to fish around it.
Oh,
I mean, that's a target.
There you go. Why not?
and I was just going to do a shameless plug that we have a water reporter app that you can log on onto your phone with and take pictures of any kind of debris, any kind of items, you know, any kind of problems with waterways that you're concerned about, and we can find out about those issues and help them get resolved. So,
Hey, great. That's a good point, Angela. Thank you.
I will say that over in West Tennessee, there's a program throughout the state of Tennessee, and it is through the Recreation Educational Services division of TDEC that you can get some more information. But there's a Tires for Tennessee, and the recycled tires are being used now for hiking trails and walking trails and other things. So hopefully that's an effort or an initiative to retrieve tires from the waterways. I know over in West Tennessee, goodness gracious alive, there were upwards of, oh gosh, close to 700 tires that were pulled out of a location during one of their cleanups. So it's really good to get those out. And as David said, sometimes, you know, they're embedded so well into the sediment and whatnot that sometimes it's better just to leave them. You know, it just depends.
Yeah.
If you do take those out, I know Firestone, Bridgestone will take them and recycle them. So if you can get them to like a local Firestone dealer.
Good point, Scott. Thanks.
Go ahead and recycle them for you.
There you go. I know when you dig those things up out of the substrate, you're going to kick up a sediment plume, and it's not nice right now, but long term, yeah, overall, we can get rid of those. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next slide. And, you know, it comes down to what do you value? I got to brag on my daughter. Maybe you saw that I've got a 14-and-a-half-year-old. This is about 10 years ago. My parents here. But I love the rivers. Ponds are sure fun, those. Get those kids out there, catch those fish. But what do you value? I asked my daughter, what do you like about getting out on the stream this morning? I said, I've got a slide that says, what do you value? And when you're thinking about habitat in the rivers, and think about the whole watershed, what's going on up there? Is it logging? Is it residences, row crops, industries? What can go into the stream, or what can come out, or how can that stream be affected negatively? But think about what do you value? Well, we all want to catch big fish and lots of them, right? I like invertebrates, mussels, birds when I get out canoeing, fishing. I want it to be swimmable, boatable. I don't want that sinus infection when I go dunk my head, you know. My daughter said, hey, I want some fresh air out there. She likes getting out with her friends, you know, that teenager. Yeah. Folks like getting out there and socializing. It's a good place to get away from politics, right? Can I get an amen there? Huh? Yeah.
Got an amen.
Okay. So, all right, let's go on. Let me wrap it up. I'll just say, feel free to contact me. There's my email address, david_Pelren@fws.gov, and my cell number, work number is 261-5844. I tend to ignore those calls that don't have my, that I don't know people on caller ID. So leave a voicemail and I'll call you back. But for assistance on some of these things, I mentioned TDEC over here in the upper left side. The Ag Extension Service is great. with help on ponds, those obnoxious plants and such, you know. TWRA has a vast array of knowledge about all things aquatic. Keep other partners in mind. Conservation Fisheries Incorporated is a place over in Knoxville. They work with non-game fish, and they raise a lot of them. They've got some neat techniques going on. And Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute, that's the Chattanooga Aquarium, their conservation arm. They're working really hard with us, great partners. And a plug for the Fish and Wildlife Services hatcheries. We've historically worked with trout, but we're getting into the non-game fish more and more. Anyway, that's kind of a quick and dirty. And Jane, there might be particular points that I've missed. I know we've hit habitat a little bit, and we could go for a whole hour or two talking about different perturbations and ways to address them. Any other questions before we move on to Geoff?
We'll have a Q&A session after Geoff's presentation. So if something comes to mind, throw it in the chat box or write it down, and we'll talk about that just after we hear from Geoff.
We do
Geoff,
have
you're
one.
on.
We do have one question on who owns the riverbed. And that may be something Geoff is going to go on.
Yeah, I think that may be where Geoff comes in.
Look at everybody smiling at that question.
That's the
Now
$10
that's
million
It's a
question.
$64,000 question.
Yeah. That's in
Josh, do you want me to
Tennessee.
run your PowerPoint?
You can.
Okay.
Yep, you can start it.
Sure thing.
I guess I get to address the riverbed question.
Yeah, you get the expert question.
Yeah,
You're
you can
right.
So
Jump in there, let me know.
kick it down the road.
if the river is navigable, so if you can float the river, if you're on the water, you are on public land. But once you touch the bottom of that river or creek, you are on someone's private land unless it's a public park. So if a landowner says, if you get out of your boat and you're wading, or you're touching the actual bottom of the creek or river, then you are on someone's property.
That's in Tennessee.
That's in Tennessee, yes. Yeah, and that's the other thing that makes it gray, is that it's different from state to state. But in Tennessee, that is true. And on lakes, most of our lakes in Tennessee are reservoirs. So there is a public right-of-way around the entire shore of the lake. It's either owned by TVA or Army Corps of Engineers. So it's public and there's a buffer past the high water mark. But technically, if you stay below the high water mark and you need to land your vessel, you can land your vessel and take care of what you need to. Homeowners on lakes are around more than homeowners on rivers. So they will see you faster, and they will come on their deck and yell at you for being on their property. But technically, if you're below that high water mark, you're on public land. However, arguing with a homeowner in that situation, you are not going to win. So it's really in your best interest to take care of what needs to be taken care of and be on your way. You're not going to be able to use logic your way into that conversation. If someone understands that already, they're not going to come on their deck and yell at you for being on public land. So that's my public and private land spiel. Does anybody else have any other way to explain it that might be better? It's just kind of the way I run it in my head. So it's doesn't necessarily make sense, I know, about owning the riverbed underneath the water, but that's the way it is in Tennessee. So you are trespassing if you're on the land. So if you're wade fishing through people's property, you are on their property. And technically, you have to have permission to do so.
This is Dory. I do have
Hi,
one or
Ruth.
two stories where folks would be wade fishing and they would carry an inner tube and then they would lie back on it and float if they needed to.
Yes, and
Creative ways around this.
when we fish kayaks a lot, especially in the summer, the rivers are lower than normal. So there's parts where you get out and wade, where in the winter you wouldn't have to get out and wade because there's enough water in there. So that's a gray area as well. You can jump back in that kayak, but if you're in a shoal that has got 2 inches of water, you can jump in your kayak, but you're not going anywhere. You're still touching their land. So, you know, it's an iffy. I fish rivers a lot in creeks in Middle Tennessee, and I've never encountered an angry homeowner. I've met homeowners, but I've never had one, you know, really be upset. Now, that can change in the instant if somebody comes through and trashes their property. They can go from not being bothered with somebody fishing along their bank to I don't want anybody along my bank because they came and left a bunch of trash.
Right. And Jane used to be the Harpeth River State Park director, and one of the issues, especially in these very highly recreated areas, is people wanted to have like a big picnic of 20 people, and they're on a gravel bar, and then maybe that property owner, that's happened, you know, comes down, they're getting ready to have a picnic. Well, then that means the folks on the gravel bar kind of need to move, and that's where the arguments tend to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dory, I'm really glad you brought that up because gravel bars are another whole issue. And, you know, it's kind of crazy, but if you go on the website, you'll actually see where people are selling sandbars and gravel bars and other things. And it's like, how can that be? But, you know, you really have to be pretty cognizant of your surroundings and where you are when you're on the waterways. And that's probably the best way to describe it. Really quick, funny story. There were some guys fishing out on the roaring scenic river, and I was called and asked by the private landowners. They said, you know, what can we do about it? And I said, well, you know, as long as they're in their boat, they're on public lands. And he said, well, I don't mind them being in their boat. And he said, I don't even care if they get out of their boat and start wade fishing. He said, but when they steal my beer, that's where I draw the line. So Geoff, I'm leaving it to you now.
Okay. So we're going to talk about fishing, specifically kayak fishing, through the seasons. We're going to go pretty quick. I started out in fall since that's where we're in, and worked through the summer. So if we need to cut it short, we might could skip the summer part because it'll be a while before we get back there. But when we're going, your first concern, anytime you're going out on the water, safety should always be your first order of business. When you're planning your day on the water, safety needs to be number one. You need to check the weather before you leave. We had a lady, she wrote a great story for Facebook, where she was on Percy Priest Lake. A storm came up in the afternoon that she thought came out of nowhere, but there were reports that it was and clung to a buoy in the middle of the lake till someone came to rescue her. So she didn't plan for the weather, and she got caught off guard, and she was lucky that she was alive. And the whole point of her story was to plan, wear your PFD, let people know where you're going. All those things are really, really important. You should never, ever, ever leave the shore in a paddlecraft without a PFD on. I've paddled for 20 years. I was a lifeguard for 10 years. I'd never leave the bank without a PFD. If you fall out of that boat, more than likely something has happened to you. Kayaks are super stable these days. So if you fall out, you had some kind of health issue, you slipped and bumped your head, you know, you were bumped by a jet ski or a boat, so you're probably going to have a hard time trying to swim. So that PFD is really, really, really important. It's also a good idea to have a first aid kit. And I like to wear, especially on the lake, bright clothing and have a safety flag. Light on your kayak at night or low level, early in the morning or in the evening. It's really hard for boats to see kayaks in the water. They sit really close to the water. Even if they're paying attention, it's hard to see. So wearing that bright clothing and having safety flags and lights is super important. So if you'll switch to the next one. Safety in the fall is a little bit different. Fall in Tennessee means two things for us. It means football. It means hunting. And both of which, I'm from East Tennessee, so both of which suggest to me I should be wearing orange. So I'm wearing orange on the water in the fall because people like to hunt riverbeds, and they hear something coming, and they need to know that it's something bright and orange, and it's not a deer that's getting a drink in the riverbed. It's really important to wear that orange in the fall. And also in the fall, the mornings will be cooler, but the afternoons might warm up. So dressing weather aware is really important. So you need something warmer for the mornings, but it needs to be something you can probably take off because you can find yourself overdressed when it's 58 degrees in the morning. And then once the sun comes up, we're talking about at 78 degrees, your dress can get you in trouble. So spring's kind of that way as well. In the wintertime, the most pressing concern for winter is exposure to water and air. One thing we have is the rule of 120, and it's just kind of a rule of thumb. So if the air temperature and the water temperature do not add together to make 120 degrees, then you need to be dressed specifically for immersion into the water. So you need to have on layers of insulating clothing that can protect you if you get wet. Hypothermia is a very big risk when you get down below that rule of 120. Also in the winter, it's a good idea to have what we call a ditch bag. It's just a dry bag you keep in your boat with a change of synthetic clothing. Cotton will not insulate you once it gets wet. So if you carry cotton clothing and it gets wet, you actually lose your body temperature faster. So you want some type of synthetic clothing or 100% wool. That's why I listed a wool hat and gloves. So you want to have in there a change of gloves and a hat, something to start a fire with in case you need to warm up, and then some high-calorie snacks, because eating high calories will actually warm your core temperature because it causes your body to start to digest your food and you'll warm up. It's really important to fish with a partner. 2 winters ago, I went over in the Harpeth in January. Air temps were in the high 30s and water temps were in the high 40s. I was dressed up and I still, when I hit the water, you gasp, your muscles tense up. We were right at the takeout point. Since I had a partner, I didn't try to collect any of my belongings. Straight to the truck. By the time I got up the bank, we're talking 150 yards, started the truck. I was shaking so bad I could hardly start the truck because I was so cold. Got the truck started, heat on, changed into my other clothes, and I was fine. If I hadn't have been dressed appropriately, not fishing with a partner, that could have been a bad day. It was a bad day as it was. It could have been a horrible day. Spring, you got to watch the weather systems. In Middle Tennessee, spring weather systems can be violent quickly, so you just really need to keep an eye on it. It's kind of the opposite in the fall. What happens in the spring is the air temps are warmer, but the water temp is still cold. So it takes a while for that water temp, especially in the lakes, to get up in the spring. That's just something to keep in mind. And then for the next slide, when we talk about summer, you got to talk about sun and heat related. Always you need sunscreen. Long sleeves actually helps you stay cooler. I know that's counterintuitive, but it's true. Large brim hats protect your head from the sun. Bring plenty of fresh water to drink. And it's a good idea to avoid midday activity. And if you're wanting to fish, midday summer is not the time to fish. You're not going to catch much fish midday in the summer. So we're fishing lakes in the fall. So early fall, which is like right now, the bass tend to be shallow. So if you can find shallow cover, we're talking about logs that have laid down, grass, bigger boulders, anything, maybe even a tire we talked about earlier. Those shallow water cover, that's kind of where they're going to be. And if you use things like topwater lures, like a popper lure, I don't know if everybody can see or not, but these popper type lures are good. They're aggressively feeding this time of year, so they'll chase anything you throw at, and it's a lot of fun to fish. The middle of fall, which is now just a couple of weeks away, the Army Corps will start drawing the lakes down for winter, so the pool goes smaller, so they have less water in the lakes. That kind of changes fish activity, and they'll start to move back up into the mouths of the creeks that are flowing out into the main lake. So you want to look for these creeks and these creek beds, and crankbaits are a good thing to fish in the fall when they're up in those creeks, or even it's a rattle trap, which is a crankbait, but it's a flat-sided crankbait. Those work good when the fish move up in the creeks. And then late in the fall, they start to head to their winter homes. And in the winter, they're going to be in the deep water in the lakes. So they start moving back out from the creeks along the points of the main lake, like primary and secondary points. So that's where you can see where like our hills will come down into the lakes, and that'll continue out into the water. And when you're fishing those, this time of year is a good time to use a big spinner bait. Right there in late fall, they're chasing the shad, which have had time to grow. So the shad are pretty big size, and they're in schools. So this mimics that really well. If you can find a bank that the wind is blowing towards, it'll push the shad towards the bank. And spinnerbait is a great bait to use on a windblown bank in the fall. The next slide. Oh, we did it. Fishing rivers in the fall. They're still looking to eat, so they're still really active. The water has not really come up much. Our water in our rivers in the summer stays shallow. But they're going to gather at ambush points. So they're going to gather behind rocks, behind big trees, overhangs in the banks and rock piles. You look, fishing for tubes is a good thing to fish with. Ned rig is a new deal, and it's just like a stand-up jig head. That's a good thing in the fall in the rivers. Let's go to the next slide. In the winter, I'm going to skip over winter pretty much because it is tough to fish lakes in the winter in a kayak. They go deep. You need electronics to find them. You have to fish with deep running stuff. Fishing from a boat is successful in a lake in the winter, but fishing from a kayak is tough. However, the next slide, fishing rivers in the winter can be very productive. Typically, our rivers increase in flow in the winter. So it makes more areas to fish, but it also makes the paddling more challenging. So practicing your paddling and having paddling skills is important if you want to fish these rivers in the winter. Finding the deeper holes can be productive in the winter, and there's going to be more of them because the water's up. And anything that kind of imitates a crayfish, or in the winter you can use a suspending jerk bait, which is like a hard bait that will dive to a certain depth, 5 or 6 feet. And then as you jerk it, it'll twitch, and you can just let it sit and it'll suspend, and you jerk it and it'll twitch. The fish are less active, so they have to see a bait for a longer amount of time before they'll strike it. Then the springtime is a transition, so the bass are coming back in the lakes. They're going to come back from that deep water. They're going to go back to those same points they were at in the fall. Something different that a lot of people might not know in the spring you can use is called a drop shot. A drop shot has a weight that is tied below the hook, and then the main line goes from the hook to the rod, so that the weight sits on the bottom and your lure is above however long you tie this leader. And you can let it sit in one spot and just kind of wiggle it. And in the spring, when they're not so active, that can be a very, very good way to fish. Later in the spring, they move up shallow in the flats and the creeks because they start to spawn. A lot of people think spawn is a great time to fish for bass. It's very controversial because you're kind of messing with them while they're raising their babies. Typically there'll be a male and a female on a bed. The male will protect the bed, and he's smaller, and the female is the larger fish. So the male will hit anything that comes by. They'll try to bite it. So you can catch that smaller male fairly easy. The females are tougher to catch. They're a little more selective, but if you get close to the fry or close to the center of that bed, they will eat your lure as well. So people like to fish the beds because you can target bigger fish, but it's kind of controversial because you're messing with them while they're having their babies. That's kind of a personal thing. Fishermen will tell you they love it, and other fishermen will tell you don't do it. Fishing rivers in the spring. Springtime river flow can fluctuate drastically depending on those weather systems that come through. So you really need to keep an eye on the weather reports. You got to know your air temps. Don't forget your rule of 120 in the spring because the water's cold even though the air's warmed up. In the spring in the river, soft plastics, which is what everybody knows, worms, plastic worms, and crankbaits that look like smaller crayfish can work well in the spring in the rivers. Next slide. Lakes in the summer, you got to beware the boat traffic in the summer. They're very, very busy, and kayaks are hard to see. Early in the summer, you can try deeper crankbaits, which is something that has a bigger bill on it. It'll run deeper than something with a smaller bill. And then large plastic worms like this, a 10-inch worm, like a really large worm. And then summer in rivers can be tougher. If you'll switch to the next slide there. Water flow is typically low. It can create difficulties for river floats. You got to be ready to drag your kayak over shoals and gravel bars, and you're wading at times. But it can be productive if you find the deeper pools. And typically the bass are they're gonna either hit something right as it comes into the pool, or they're gonna wait at the end and hit it right as it comes out. So you want to concentrate on the beginning of the pool or the end of the pool. And don't be afraid to throw your lure into the shallowest riffles, moving water. Large smallmouth bass, so larger size smallmouth bass, will be in some skinny water in the summer if it's moving and there's a lot of oxygen. So don't be afraid to fish those shallow little waterfalls and all those things, because there'll be fish in there. I put up a couple of resources. So this first one is a TVA Lake Info. It's an app that tells you can look up the dam. So if you're going to be fishing below, like tailwaters below dams, they'll tell you the generation schedule, which is really important. One thing I will note is you need to check it often. So if you check it the day before, check it again before you go, because they can change their generation schedule at any time they want. They're not set. So even though it says it on the app, doesn't mean that tomorrow it's the same. So check it often, even on the way to fish, check it. The next slide is a link that goes to the USGS. It's the river gauge data, and you can look up state specific, and it'll have even smaller creeks like Daddy's Creeks on there. And it'll tell you the river flow, and there's all kinds of graphs that you can look at. One thing you need to know if you're going to fish these smaller creeks and rivers is you need to find what the typical flow is and compare it to what the current flow is. Because like in the Caney Fork, if it's like a 3,500 flow, that's easy to float and normal. If it's an 8,500, that's too much. But if you apply those same numbers to a different body of water, they do not apply. So you have to kind of know. So if you look at this, you can get historical data and see normally it's this flow, but this weekend it's twice that much. I'm not getting in the water. It's going to be hard to fish anyway. And then next slide. Some additional resources. So Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association, and I'm a member of that group as well. There's all kinds of information. It's like a sister to this group, really. It's just not focused just on the Harpeth. It's all of Tennessee. And I will be teaching a kayak fishing specific class in October, and that's through Tennessee Scenic River Association. So if you go to that webpage, you can sign up for that class. It'll be in Middle Tennessee, one of the tributaries to Percy Priest, but we're not sure exactly yet. It'll depend on weather. And then also American Canoe Association, that's where I got my certification from. It's a great resource for anything paddling or water related. And then the last slide is just my contact info. So I think they're going to share this out. So if you want to reach out to me, that email address is the easiest way to reach out. And I will typically answer you back within a day. I check it fairly often.
Geoff, that was great. We have two really quick questions for you before everybody leaves. One, do you have some anchoring tips for waters?
So anchoring in a kayak is tricky. In a lake, it's pretty much like anchoring a boat. But anchoring in moving water can be dangerous. So if you're going to anchor in a river, you definitely need to have something to cut free. You find yourself in an issue if you can cut that anchor line and get free immediately and then worry about retrieving that anchor later. That's the biggest advice I can give you. Another thing that works well in rivers is what we call a drag chain. So I built one. So I took a section of chain that was a safety chain from a trailer. You heat up a bicycle inner tube, you pull the chain through the inner tube and cut off the ends. And then in the middle of the chain, attach a rope that goes to your kayak. And that chain will drag along slowly, and it won't get caught up, and it slows your progression, but it's not just a straight up anchor. Straight up anchoring in current can be dangerous.
And what about in high flow situations?
Like anchoring in high flow?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't. To be honest with you, I don't even bring a drag chain. So I float the river, and if I need to paddle back up and do that section again, I do. And if the flow's too much to paddle back up, then I miss my shot. Couple of reasons. I don't like dragging anything along the bottom of the river. And it's just not real safe. Now, I know I have friends that will. I have friends that will anchor up and fish that one spot. And, you know, typically you want to, from your kayak, you want to put it off the bow or the stern and not necessarily the side of the boat, so that your boat will turn in the current instead of being broadside to the current. Because if you anchor broadside to the current and you lean just a little bit upstream, it's going to pull that boat right out from under you. I mean, really fast. But that's just personal preference.
And obviously we have some folks that are in the Bellevue area and really enjoy fishing the Harpeth. And I think you've had an opportunity to get out there on Harpeth some. Do you have a favorite spot?
You know, I like to put in right there under the bridge at Foggy Bottom. That's right?
Highway 70? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, put in the Highway 70 bridge and then float down to that next takeout before you get to the narrows of the Harpeth. That little section right there.
That gossip track area.
Gossip
That's
track,
good. Yeah.
Yeah, and there, I mean, you can catch crappie there. You can, and I kind of focus this on bass, but I love to catch everything. I love to catch crappie. I love to catch bluegill. You know, I like to catch whatever's swimming. But in that section in the Harpeth, I mean, there's nice sized crappie in that section, and of course smallmouth bass. Huge. There's some 28 smallmouth bass through there, so that's a good section to fish. That's where I fell in. Right at the takeout there. That's right where I fell in.
Well, any more questions? We're right at the 7 o'clock hour, and wow, that was fantastic, guys. Does anybody have any other questions for these?
I see
two?
one on there about fishing in the Stones River. Stones River can be great, or it can be horrible. Kind of depends on which section of the Stones, weather, how many people have fished it recently. But I live in Old Hickory, which is up on this side, so I fish the Stones River much more than I fish the Harpeth.
And last question, I guess, is what about well, we have several questions. What about a sit on top versus a sit in?
Kind of a personal preference. I've had both. I have a paddleboard too. I fish off a paddleboard. That's what actually I was on the paddleboard the day I fell in the Harpeth. It's kind of personal preference. The sit-ins, a lot of times you have to keep your arms up a little bit more. So if you fish for a long time, you'll find that your shoulders will get stiff and your upper back will get stiff. But it's just a personal preference. You know, some of the newer sit-ins, they're more like a hybrid, so it looks like an open canoe almost, but it's a kayak. They have an elevated seat, so it kind of took care of that issue. The thing about boats, and people ask me all the time, like, what kayak do you suggest? I just suggest that you paddle one you think you like and decide whether you like it or not. Because I might love it, and I say it's the best boat ever made, and then you get in it, and 10 minutes later, you're like, I can't even stay upright in this boat. It's very, very personal preference.
We have one more question. It's a bait question. Are Helgramites a good bait in Tennessee?
Yes. Helgramites are a great bait in Tennessee, and a lot of people don't talk about them. I've got some, but I didn't bring any in from the garage. But yeah, a Helgramite on this little Ned head, it's like a stand-up jig head. And I know Helgramites don't go down the river like standing on their head. But this jig head will pick them up out of the rocks, and the fish will come get it. You know, I had a biologist that's a friend of mine that was like, well, that's silly because Helgramites don't do that in the river, but they will come and get it. Yes, there's one.
There you go.
Yeah, about a 3-inch Helgramite is what you're looking for. Yep.
That's ugly.
How's a fish like?
Yeah, and they're in the rivers. If the river's good and clean, there's Helgramites in there. So they work great in the Caney Fork River for smallmouth bass in the Caney Fork River. Yep.
I want to thank everybody.
I want to chime in sort of as a novice, but I have a cheap fishing pole, and I go to some local areas when I need a break. And I always end up catching the bluegills and stuff because they're sort of near where the areas in the Harpeth, and I just kind of wing it. So I don't know if there's a certain size hooks, different seasons of fish are different sizes. So I've tried different things, but
if you want to fish
worms on a hook, that's kind of what I do, and I just see what I catch.
If you want to fish just for bluegill,
I don't really care, but that's all I ever catch.
Trout magnets. They're actually made for trout. They're called trout magnets.
Okay.
But bluegill will tear them up. But the trick to that is you have to use 2-pound line, which most people think, oh my gosh, what are you going to catch with 2-pound line? But if you use trout magnets on 2-pound line, you will catch all the bluegill and use one little bitty rubber piece of, looks like a little bug.
Yeah.
You use one all day long. You won't have to rebait. Use a worm. You got to put a worm. You use one all day long till you're done, unless you get hung up. They're the best bluegill bait ever made.
Thank you. I appreciate that tip because I do. I end up like rebating all the time. The other thing that we're bringing it, I just want to swing back around to something that people asked David a while back, because we get a lot of folks when we started working on like stream restoration, going, the stream looks messy. Why don't you get the debris out of it? I want it to look neat. And so we've had to do a lot to really point out, because fishermen know it, but a lot of this woody debris is fish habitat. And what we wrestle with is, when is it really turning into like a micro flooding creek problem, that kind of thing, like a plug. But it's interesting how many suburbanites want it to look like a swimming pool. I mean, they don't understand.
Yeah, some of that's just the natural. It's just, it's in there. So.
And when they go kayaking, they want it not to have any obstructions, and that's kind of another challenge,
Yeah. Now, sometimes you have to get out of the kayak and pull it over or something. I mean, that's just part of it. A lot of times people get kind of tore up because, it's a plastic boat, but it's a plastic boat. So if it gets scratched, it gets scratched. It's a plastic boat. It gets scratched. That's just how it goes.
I bring this up partly because some of the city parks people, now there are more access points, and it depends on where you are, but like in Franklin and Williamson County and Jane, I don't know about Harpeth River State Park, but there seem to be, they get more phone calls. Hey, there's a tree down, go out and do it and clear it, and it's just, there's an expectation.
Yeah. So, and some of that becomes a safety thing if it turns into a strainer, or if it, completely across the river, and, so there is a fine line there about what to clear and what to leave.
Those are all good points, and a couple of things just to remember. If you guys spot anything and you see anything, it's okay. Give us a holler. Make us aware of it. If it's something that we can look into, or something we can do something about, we'll look into it. And if it's something we can address, we will. And if it's something we need to pass on to somebody else, we'll certainly go that route also. One other thing, a quick question here from Eric. He wants to know if the presence of gar are an indication of anything like low water.
David may be able to answer that better than me.
I don't know that they would be a good indicator about poor water quality or low dissolved oxygen, things like that. I know I see gar I've seen them on the East Fork Stones River a good bit. Heck, we've seen them at, I've caught one on Percy Priest jug fishing with my dad this spring. You'll see them all around. They're a neat fish. Enjoy them.
I mean, last winter I caught a gar, and then the very next cast I caught an 18-inch smallmouth. I mean, they're living in the same, exact same spot.
Sure. Sure. Good point. So. Yep. They like those pools.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're at 7:06, guys. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And we will post the video from this presentation, as well as send you all the presentations in an email, along with a feedback survey. We'd love to have your feedback. What do you want to learn about next time? Another conservation conversations or lessons on the river? And I know that y'all are some experts too. Let us know if there's something you want to share with us.
And another plug, like Angela did, to use the Water Reporter app, since you all are clearly out in the waterways a lot. That really helps. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's bank erosion, an old car. A lot of the old agricultural areas, you'll see cars and tires. They were actually recommended in the 50s as stream bank stabilization. So that's why you see them in a lot of the rural areas. But any of those kind of things in the Water Reporter app's really easy. It works like you just take a picture and it's uploaded, and it's already tells us where it is, so you don't have to do all that other information.
Good point, Doria.
Yeah. HarpethRiver.org. Ryan, you're on. Where do they find the Water Reporter app?
Yeah, it's on our website. You just go to the program section in science, and you can find it in there, and it'll give you all the instructions you need.
It was great to see all y'all tonight. And
thanks everybody.
Yeah.
This was
I'm
super
not
fun.
gonna try kayak fishing though. I'm not falling out of the kayak. I'm staying.
I love kayak.
That's the best part.
If you try it once, you won't go back. You'll love it.
I know,
exactly right.
I got all the gear. I'm just a little, I can hear it now. The CEO of Harpeth Conservancy, flipped out of her kayak and had to be rescued.
It's standing up that'll get you.
Yeah.
The kayaks are stable enough now. You don't have to worry about it.
All right,
Yeah.
Pontoon kayak.
Geoff and
We'll hold
Dave,
you to
thank
that,
you so
Scott.
much. Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
guys, for
Thank you. Bye-bye.
putting on the presentation. All right, thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.